Welcome to the Ispim Special Interest Group on Social Innovation. Today, so we are a recently launched group, part of the International Society for Professional Innovation Management, which has different interest groups spanning from, artificial intelligence to responsible innovation. But this group kind of focuses on social innovation, and today we're very much excited to explore the intersection of design and social innovation. So I'll pass the floor to Elena in a second, who together we are kind of co-hosting and chairing this special interest group to introduce what's happening today. And I'll pass the floor to you, Elena.
Thank you, Kiki, and welcome to everyone, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon also from my side. So today will be like the first of this series that we decided to name as Coffee for Thoughts, because we were thinking about, gathering together scholars and practitioners on social innovation that recently published or in general achieved some interesting insights on social innovation that also open up for further discussions and stretch our mind, to think about possible ways to tackle this, let's say, huge topic that can be tackled, as Kiki said, from many perspectives. So let me just briefly introduce, because I assume many of you already know her, but just a couple of words of our today's speaker and, let's say, server of our coffee for today. So we have with us Professor Anne-Laure Fayard. She is an ethnographer of work, and she's dedicated to the research and practice on social innovation and human-centered design. So she is a full professor at Nova School of Business and Economics in Portugal, where she coordinates the DESIS, the Design for Social Innovation and Sustainability Lab. And she is also an ERA chair of social innovation. So she will also dedicate a couple of words to the role of the lab also within the chair. So Anne-Laure, thanks again for accepting our invitation, and I will leave you the space for your speech. Thanks. Thank you everyone for attending also.
Hello everyone. I wish I could have given you like some coffee, because I'm a big coffee drinker, and unfortunately this morning I went like usually I always arrive, at least half an hour before to be able to have coffee, and I would have been able to show you my mug, but today it didn't work like that. So I have no coffee, but I will try to still, share with you some thoughts. So the aim for today is I'm going to tell you a little bit more about like some work I've done recently published in Stanford Social Innovation Review around design thinking, and what with my co-author Sarah Fetella, who's a social designer and design researcher, call a critical design stance. But before that, I will tell you a little bit more about who I am, in the sense of like, how did I come to this intersection between social innovation and design, and a little bit about the ERA chair in social innovation and the DESIS lab, because I think it kind of tells you also how we're trying to practice this intersection here at Nova SBE, and then move on like highlighting a few points from the paper. I'm going to try to keep it to less than half an hour, so that we have time for question and conversation. And if you want to interrupt me, please go for it. I'm all for conversation. So just very quickly, I think that my work is really at the intersection of collaboration, innovation, and technology. And originally I was, I came to social innovation, in fact, by looking at open social innovation, and particularly spending more than 4 years doing an ethnography of a platform called Open IDEO, which is a platform that the design consultancy IDEO started in 2010 around social innovation. So that's how I kind of got interested in this notion of social innovation. And my kind of main three theories is really organizational theory, philosophy, because I was trained originally as a philosopher, and design. I fell into the design pot when I was finishing my PhD in 1995, and I worked with a project as an ethnographer. I basically met, ethnography and design at the same time, because I worked on a project with participatory design with air traffic controllers. So that was about like how they work together. So it was collaboration, technology, because that was like we were trying to innovate and design new tools for the air traffic controller. At the time, we thought it was very cool and new. We were using augmented reality. And so my methodology are really ethnography, design, and design research. And when I say action research, I know that sometimes people are like, it's not, but it's really that I always I'm always interested in trying to see if some of our research can have an impact in people's life. And currently, so I joined NOVA a bit more than 2.5 years ago. It's going to be 3 years in the fall as the ERA chair in social innovation. And prior to that, I was at NYU for 15 years and then spent time at INSEAD and a short time at Imperial College, where I was in fact in an interesting group, Design London. So I was already with a design part, which was it was a collaboration between the Imperial College Business School and the Royal College of Art. And so that's where I started also doing a lot of an ethnography around service design. So I always had these three connections, and what I was really excited and intrigued when I applied for the ERA chair was really this combination. We have 3 pillars. So one is research, and we're trying to, produce research that is published in academic journals. But we also have an education arm, and it's about trying to create new courses, but also thinking about I believe that teaching education happens outside of the classroom. So we do a lot of informal teaching and then community engagement. And so we try to collaborate with multiple stakeholders, whether it's non-for-profit, whether it's local residents, municipalities, to create social change on multiple levels. And I'll tell you a little bit more, and we can continue during the conversation. Just in terms of research, I think that the question that we really try to look, and when I say we, it's because the chair has this interesting model where we have a assistant professor who are also part and PhD students working on the topics. And we're really looking at collaboration and how we can trigger and nurture social innovation with 3 different approaches. One looking at really cross-sector collaboration and how do we get, non-for-profit, public sector and private organization working together. Open social innovation, as I told you, it's where I started. And I think it's really the same. It's a form of cross-sector. It's just you add the citizens and the public, but it's a form of cross-sector collaboration. And then co-creation, and I think design had taught us a lot about co-creation. It's at the core, and I think also maybe I'm a little bit biased because the first project I worked on, we were doing participatory design, so working with the air traffic controller. So in my head, it has always been, important to engage the user, not only by, observing them or interviewing them, but having them involved in the process. So the DESIS lab, which kind of brings us to design. So at NYU, I had started something called the design lab. We were within the makerspace, and I was also part of the makerspace creation. And so when I moved to Lisbon, I decided to, I thought that the design part would be really interesting for community engagement and also informal education. And I knew about DESIS, which is Design for Social Innovation and Sustainability. It's an international network. And I felt like, I'm moving to a new country, to a new school. I don't know anyone. Maybe it'd be good to have some people that I can connect with. And it happens that there was a DESIS lab in Aveiro, a little bit north of Lisbon. So I connected with them. I applied to the network. And so we're now part of a network. And we now have 2 DESIS lab in Lisbon. But so it's really... So each DESIS lab has a different way of doing it. Ours is really focusing on informal teaching and community engagement with we're trying to bring the research arm aspect also, and it's kind of providing, always interesting questions for us. And so we do, regular workshop. Here it's like what you see on the picture is like a workshop we did as part of a bigger project where we were looking at rethinking the space. Like we have a big gallery in the campus, and we worked with Access Lab, which is a small consultancy working with around disability and access to public spaces, in particular for performance and cultural events. And so they came with us, and you can see we started thinking about even how do we reuse some of the design tools. So we had someone who was visually impaired, and if you do card sorting or mapping with someone who is visually impaired, how do you do that? And so, we started playing with Legos, with threads to start thinking about that. And then we have a long-term project. So our first long-term project is a community garden. It's really work in progress, but we kind of really kicked it off 2-3 weeks ago with a school of a class of 3rd grader who came and, did an activity with us there. And so our principle is really collaboration with different communities and stakeholders. So from, the schools, the groups, we've been also working with Fab Lab Lisboa, with a number of stakeholders around Lisbon. And across, we still work with a design lab at NYU, reflexivity, and I'll go back to that, but we really try to be really always careful in our way of approaching communities and not thinking we're saviors or heroes, coming to help. Impact oriented, how do we, try to not just do short jams, hackathons, etc., and then, ideas are produced and then nothing happens. And that's a tough one, but we try to think about it, and also, inclusivity, and how do we make sure that we open up space. And this is also work in progress, in particular when you're, in a business school or higher ed education in general, like how do you really are open to other communities. So let me go to the kind of the core of a paper and open it up to conversation, because that's where I'm excited to go to. Oftentimes, the reason why we started this paper is I think that what Sarah and I noticed is that design thinking, had become kind of a magic bullet. Whether it was, originally, started the 2000, and I think that sometimes people think, it started in 2000, 2005. They remember, Tim Brown's book, etc. But there's a whole long history of design and design thinking, at least to the 50s or 60s. But some people who do work on that would argue that even in indigenous communities, there's a form of participatory design that has been existing for, forever. But so let's start with, a Western view. And I think that this has become as a design thinking as a magic bullet. In particular, I've seen, in social innovation world, in international development, more and more non-for-profit, public sector, trying to go and work with design. Myself being, asked to do some trainings, to participate to project, to give feedback. Sarah has been working a lot in this topic. And, oftentimes people feel like, for those of you, but I'm sure everybody's kind of aware, but there's this idea that we have a design thinking approach. We start with understanding, we frame the problem, we ideate, we prototype, and, we come back to, and you test and you come back. And you have multiple different models, with 3 steps, 7 steps, etc. But there's always this idea that, we can follow this process and some kind of innovation will happen. However, I've noticed, Sarah noticed that, there was kind of a tendency of a lot of hopes and then sometimes despair because things don't necessarily work as it is. I think, whether it's with design or any types of innovation, in particular social innovation, but because there was this hope that, there was like this toolkit that we could just use and it would work. There was some despair. And recently there was a paper by Rebecca Ackerman, who's a designer and researcher in the MIT Technology Review, where she, basically kind of opened up what many people were thinking, what design thinking is no magic bullet. So, she has this claim design thinking was supposed to fix the world, but, in her paper, she showed how organizations rarely implement the ideas generated during the design thinking process. And so that kind of, got Sarah and I to really think through a lot of our work, a lot of literature, recent literature in design research, where you have a lot of designers who've been, thinking about what's really the role of design and asking questions about the stance that design has maybe taken as a more of a, savior or heroic value. As we were going through this, we kind of came up with 3 main dimensions why we believe design thinking can become reductive. This tendency to believe that you have X steps, whether it's 3, 7, etc., and you have one singular toolkit. And I had people who say, "Oh, you're doing it this way or that way. I'm doing it a different way." And I always tell people, this is not about the methods. It's really about what we try to do. So this formulaic view of design, I think, has the risk of, there's not one size fits all. And so if we think that there's only one size of design thinking, then there's going to be a lot of things that don't fit in. A decontextualized view. So there's tendency of thinking that, designers are neutral, that we can just come in, and having also sometimes, I think, in the context of social innovation, trying to fix things at the individual level without realizing that, there might be a broader systemic issues, and that we can give, creativity or empathy to certain vulnerable groups. It might make their, experience better, but it's not going to solve the whole problem. I'm not saying that we should not do it, but I think we should also understand that it's bigger. And then short-termist. So I think that a lot of the projects, if you look at them, have a more of a consulting model. You come in, you work with the beneficiary, local group, etc., and then you come up with a solution, hoping that someone else will go and do something. Having open innovation, which has been used a lot, hackathons, design jams, and it can be online or not, also lead to this way of we generate ideas, but there's not necessarily a thinking about how to make it work. I think it's changing, but I think that there's still work to be done here. And so what we proposed in this article was really what we called a critical stance on design. And by stance we meant values that are enacted in practice, where critical means both discerning and important. And so we invited designers and basically anyone who wants to take a designerly approach to adopt a continuously reflexive and questioning stance, akin to what the scholar and activist Angela Davis called a way of thinking, a way of inhabiting the world that asks us to be constantly critical, constantly conscious. And so what does it mean? So it means thinking a critical stance is a stance that is relational, which goes beyond, traditional Western distinctions of there's the knowledge and there are those who knows, and then there are the others. And so, using a lot of work on indigenous communities and indigenous knowledge, that kind of forces us to rethink a lot of these kind of dichotomic boundaries, and asking who is the experts. And then that leads also to thinking of changing the role of designers as not necessarily the people who have the ideas, but really as connectors and facilitators, which, by the way, has been, something that I've seen also in other part of design, in service design, for example. Reflective, so being aware of your assumptions and your positionality, knowing that you always come in with a certain, power position, and there are power dynamics. And even if you co-create, there are people who comes into this arrangement with different positions and power positions. And then also being politically committed. In that sense, it's just realizing that design is not objective or neutral. It always reflects and shapes realities. And so that the decisions we make are, having an impact that has political implications. So I thought I will, rather than telling you what is in the article, I would kind of revisit a few projects that I worked with, and try to see how what question we ask and how critical we were. And I think, this as I was writing the article, a lot of this project were influencing the way I was thinking about it and how I would have done things differently. So this is the Bindi project is a project I did with students. We participated to an Open Idea Challenge. We were selected, and our idea, which was a community-centered program for women in low-income community in the slum in Kathmandu, in that case, because we kind of partner with a non-for-profit in Kathmandu, and decided that the funding that we got would be used for implementing this project with them in the slum they were working with. And test the ideas. And so I think that for us, and as with the students, we worked at distance with that non-for-profit, but then ended up going to Nepal. And I think for us, from the beginning, we felt we wanted to be, to co-create with a non-for-profit, but also with the women. The non-for-profit sent us pictures, went to the slum, like we asked them to ask people questions, but we always had this question about like, who are we really co-creating with? Is it with a non-for-profit? Is it with the women? How does it work? And so when we went to Nepal, that was a big question. We had this moment where we did a meeting among ourselves about like what were our fear, our assumptions, and one was really like what's our role when we arrive there, and we come to these people who have like our experts in their life, and we're coming with our tools about from design. And for us, it was, I remember the first evening after we did this workshop with the women, where we all looked at each other and we're like, okay, it works. And by it works, it meant like a conversation was started, and we learned a lot, and it's not like that we were right or wrong, but movement started to happen. And in fact, even the non-for-profit was surprised by things that the women said that they've never heard. But then, as we had to go away, I think that there's also what we realized is there's a lot of structure in terms of the social structure in Nepal, the role of the non-for-profit, etc., that made it really hard to then keep the voice of the women and some of the things they say during that 1 week or 10 days we spent with them, to continue the issue. Another thing, that came up, for example, which I think is a big question, is like payment. So originally, we thought the women would come and that we would pay for their travels, etc. And then the non-for-profit very quickly said, no, but we need to pay these women because that's time. They're not helping us. They could do something else. They could look for work. They could work. But with the funding agency, it was really hard because we're not paying people, we're paying for other things. We finally succeeded in getting them to be paid. And I think that's something that, that conversation with a non-for-profit and their advocacy for the women was really important for me. And if you look at the conversation that happened today in terms of, what really means participation. I think that is very important. Like, we came unpaid, we were volunteering, but like, we were getting something out of it. What were we getting out of it? So I think these are important questions. The project lasted for 2 years. But we were hoping that we would find a way of making it continue. But I think the non-for-profit was thinking really more of a grant model, and so it ended up not continuing. I went back a year ago. I met some of the women, and I think they were like, "Oh, when do you have the next grant? Because we want to do another project with you." And so we also did the same, like a pilot of the same idea in Queens, in New York, because we felt it's closer to us, and worked with women there. And I think in that case we were not able to pay them because we didn't have money, but we really spent time with them trying to figure out like what was really important to them. And we also realized that we had to challenge a lot of the assumptions that the non-for-profit had about what they wanted to do or not wanted to do. But I'm happy to talk more. But I think for us also, it was really interesting to see how a lot of the issue we saw in Nepal of power, dynamics were kind of coming again. And then we did another project again with students, another group of students with homeless women in New York. And I think, this project lasted also for about 2 years, and it changed many times. It started, we were looking at sanitary pads and access to and for women, homeless women during their menstrual period, during their menstruations, and then realized that was not necessarily the issue. Then we realized it was like, so we had a lot of iteration, and I think that was really hard for us to first, be with these women, but also for the students to realize that maybe some of the assumptions that we had to let go, but also that some of these women, we wanted to give you an example. We wanted also to co-create with them. And so we felt like, the first workshop, we're going to invite them for breakfast, I'm sure a lot of people will come. And when we started going around and, some of the women we knew saying like, we're going to do this breakfast, they were like, I'm not so sure. And then one of them told us, I understand you think that we want to have breakfast, and it's nice, we'd like to have breakfast, but you're asking us to leave our spot to go somewhere else. And in fact, people who are homeless are very attached to their spot, and that's also where they can, do panhandling. It's also important that the people from the city see them at the same spot all the time, so that they then are recognized as being homeless. So we just realized that we were kind of projecting on them like a good breakfast would be enough for them to be willing to talk to us. And that changed a lot. And then, talking about positionality, at some point, the students like, what can we do? It's a broken system. What can we do? And then we thought about it, and we thought like, maybe, as, people who are in a institution, an academic institution, and we have access to people, we could give them some voice. Because one thing that these women say is like, I sit on the street, I see thousands of people every day, and nobody looks at me. I'm invisible. And so we felt like, how can we make them visible? So that's what this, pop-up exhibit that we did in at Frog Design, another design consultancy, and then tried to do at other places was about. And I think that I just want to finish very quickly as I was writing this paper with Sarah, I thought about my own teaching and my own practice. I teach a course, Design Thinking for Social Innovation. And this semester, I thought like, okay, how can I really take some of these, practices or like this stance, and how can I apply it to myself? Do I really do a good job? And so this year, we working around migrants and employment, and we worked with a non-for-profit. We were able to, that help us, like, we made a call to their community. We hired consultants who are migrants. We're able to pay them for their work with the students. And so I think that has been very important also for the students. The consultants have been very, very much engaged. And so I think that it has been, changing one thing. And the other part was, when I do these courses, and I'm sure every one of us who do like project-based learning, if you give a challenge, you expect that the students will all come with different solutions. And it's not competitive, but kind of like, what is the best idea? And I said it up front, but left it open, and we're doing the exhibition today, and it's going to be, in fact, a whole journey. I said, it's a very complicated system. So instead of like each coming up with the best idea, can we look at a different part of the system and as a class come up with a general solution? And so I think that was, students were looking at me at the beginning of semester saying, yeah, yes, maybe. And then 2 weeks ago, one of them say, all these ideas are connected. Can we present them as a connected idea, a big idea? And I say, yes, of course. So sometimes we are this moment where you're like, I think it's about teaching. Sometimes you're happy. So, but I think that what is really important, and that was key for us, is still key, is that a stance is not prescriptive. Okay, so we have a toolbox, and now it's up to you, to us, to adapt it intentionally and thoughtfully. And I think it's more really, this article is really more of an invitation to think critically about participation and community accountability, about the problem, because I think it's a big thing. Is we come thinking we know what is the problem, as the organization or the designer, you have the brief. But then when you start working with the communities, you realize that maybe you have a wrong perception of what is really the problem and what is the brief. So Sarah has been doing like really interesting work where she even kind of brainstormed what was the problem. So she didn't then presume that she knew what was the brief. About innovation, scale, and impact, because I think that, there's always this idea that we need to come up with like a breakthrough idea. And sometimes, it's just about making something that exists, scalable or just visible. Also thinking about scale, not necessarily about like adding more beneficiary, but sometimes maybe going deeper in with one group, offering more. And so how do we think about impact in that sense? And then in terms of funding and timeline. So, I think I mentioned it. I think when we do open social innovation types of challenges, we tend to, we're very good now. I think we know how to bring people together from diverse backgrounds and get them to come up with ideas. But then what happens to these ideas after is sometimes forgotten. I think, we start thinking about it, but that's difficult. And if you look at funding and talking with a lot of these non-for-profits, it's like, how do we figure out a way of funding that allows for the long term, and maybe also thinking of different model than just a grant model. So these are just questions, and I'd be happy to continue the conversation with all of you.
Thank you, Anne-Laure. Thanks a lot. So I think that there's a lot of coffee, so a lot of food for thoughts. So I will open the questions for our attendants. If you have curiosities or feedbacks or in general questions for Anne-Laure.
Yeah, so please raise your hand and then unmute yourself. So Patrick.
Good morning. That was really interesting, what you were explaining just now. And I work in an area where I work a lot with big systems, policies. My biggest project right now is about accelerating the transition for aviation to sustainable travel. And so I'm actually working with India, and we just did a roadmap, so we're working with refineries and with farmers, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things that is, the key to what we're doing here is finance. And innovative forms of finance. And this is an area I think that's often underestimated in importance. And I'm glad that you mentioned, the role of finance, and the grant model and other models. And it's extraordinary, a little bit under the radar. Amazing things have been happening in the world of finance. Impact funding, for example. In Belgium earlier this year, we had a meeting saying that we don't want to finance change, we need to change finance, and so, but the role of finance itself is really important. But on its own, it's not enough, you know. So now you have the concept. I mean, we're working on a 300 million euro fund to help the farmers get organized to gather their waste and sell it to refineries to produce sustainable fuels. But the big problem there is that the farmers, they don't want 100 million, you know, they want like 50,000 euros. And the transaction costs on this are really high. So the banks don't know how to give them this money or make it available. But a lot of innovative people in finance have been coming up with new methods. And so this is what we're working on now in the case of India. But nevertheless, to make that work, there's a whole bunch of parallel issues that need to be addressed. And one is about reporting on sustainability. And it's funny, the refineries, nobody is talking about this. But without the reporting, you cannot sell sustainable fuel at a premium, you know, which you have to do. And it's not financially viable for the producers. And the other thing is, you know, when you're working with the farmers, they need support from local government. I mean, really silly things, like maybe you need, the trucks have to go under a bridge, but is the bridge, you know, too low, or do you need a different truck? I mean, there are lots of services that are required at local level for the system to work. And so there's a need for training, you know, and working with local government as well. And there are mechanisms to do this. But the point is that, you know, when we came in initially to this, I mean, first thing we discovered was that people were asking the wrong questions, you know. They wanted to talk about new technologies, but all of the industrial guys said, we don't need new technologies. There are other problems that need to be solved. So we were successfully moved the focus in that sense through a discovery process. So discovery and design. And then when we came into the kind of the design part of it, we discovered all kinds of other areas. And what this created was the problem that now everyone is saying, oh, it's really important, we need to do it, but it's not our job. So we're dealing with all of the silos in public administration. And so we're working away on this, but it's just what amazes me is the extent to which we have drifted away from the original concept of the problem and uncovered layers of the onion, you know, that, and as we move away, we find that all other areas that were underestimated really play a key role, and different administrations need to be involved, and they all see themselves in silos. And so bringing them to the table to understand that, you know, at the level of the farmers, the people at the airlines say, we don't care about the farmers, it's not our business, you know. But you have to care. Otherwise, if they don't find solutions to their problems, you'll never have sustainable fuels, you know, for the airlines, you know. And people just don't see this. But anyway, just to say, and that you know, I really appreciate what you said about the role of finance and results, you know, not just a plan. Like we were charged with creating a roadmap. So we did the roadmap, but the point is a roadmap isn't good enough. We have to implement it. And so we have to set up the conditions for implementation as we go along. And that was part of the design process for us, was creating the conditions for implementation. I can't say we're at the end of that road yet. We're on the road, we're solving the problems as we go. But I think it's really interesting, the kind of issues that you're speaking about. And they apply at a very large scale and all the way down to a very small scale as well. So anyway, that's my little 2 cents.
Thank you very much. I think that, you know, for me, this whole idea of reframing and also thinking about setting up the conditions. So it's not only about the innovation per se, but like, how are we going? And your point about innovation is what I was saying is like, you know, what is innovation? And it's not necessarily, you know, a new AI tool, and it can be sometimes something very simple. So, and just thinking about, you know, the kind of trucks we're using. So I think it's really useful. Thank you very much for sharing.
Maybe I can go next while the rest are thinking of their questions. I really liked your work and your piece, and it's partly because like I feel like I have this like a love-hate relationship with design thinking. I'm an anthropologist by training, And so when I was first introduced to design thinking, I was like, yeah, it sounds a little bit like anthropology. Has a lot of post-its, but then as you mentioned, you know, there are certain elements that are both good and bad with design thinking. And I experienced design thinking when I in this course that I got involved with called challenge-based innovation. So we use design thinking to think about the process of innovation. We gave the students sustainable development goals as challenges. And then I ended up kind of like feeling like at the end coming to similar kind of challenges to design thinking, like you mentioned, like it is formulaic, it is deconceptualized, and it's really hard to come up with something meaningful in such a short time. But then when you teach a course, though, what do? I mean, you work with students in a small kind of amount of time. And then sometimes I feel that actually the students do come up with some interesting ideas in that short time, even if it's a little bit, you know, the process is, you know, we have learned how to, as you mentioned, to have a big toolbox and use bits and pieces. So how do you deal with, what do you do with your student outcomes? You know, do you, it's just kind of to get some ideas of like this pool of thoughts from students coming out and prototypes coming out of the design thinking process. What do you do afterwards?
That's a great question. I do many things, but I don't have a full solution. I think I keep thinking and, you know, and asking myself a question. I think that when we were so as I was studying Open IDEO, we participated in my class oftentimes to Open IDEO. So I had students who ended up having an idea selected and working on it. So in some ways, you know, it came out. The makerspace at NYU was originally an idea that, you know, some students came out with this idea that they wanted, they called it the greenhouse. They wanted a space that would be connected. And so that would be like a place that was not a lounge, not a library, but a place where you could, you know, ideate, etc. And so they came up with this idea. They used the design thinking process kind of on the side afterwards. You know, the idea came in my class and they kept working on it. And then they ended up implementing it. I have a few students and I supported them because, you know, we ended up having that greenhouse. So I try to support, but it's a lot of work and it's difficult. I have a few stories of students who continued, one who participated, well, to Open IDEO ended up having a venture. What I've been doing also recently, the community garden we have is basically, it's not one idea, but like in 2 or 3 courses, this idea of a community garden came up all the time. So I ended up having a student who wanted to do her master thesis on something with design and who was interested in nature. And I say, hey, what do you think? Like, it seems that it's something that, you know, I have a lot of like little baby ideas here around that. So she took it, she worked on it, and then now we, you know, we got the space and we're working on it. So, but she's not continuing, like it's us, but we're trying to bring other students. So I think it's also about temporalities, like getting new people to come in, I think. I've tried also like, so today we're doing like more of an exhibition, so where I'm inviting non-for-profit, you know, also companies, so to kind of change things and hoping that maybe, you know, maybe they're not going to take that idea, but that it would be, so it's not a closed room presentation. It's like I'm trying to create this conversation. And in this case, you know, working with a non-for-profit, and trying to see if like it happens that like at least one team has been thinking about an idea that could be useful to them, and the 2 teams. So the non-for-profit is interested in maybe re-implementing it. So finding ways of like maybe creating the conditions. It's a bit what Patrick was saying, like for implementation. But this is difficult because they come to your course and they care. You know, they all say, oh, would like the idea to continue, but not enough that they will keep doing the idea, and I cannot implement all their ideas. So it's like trying to create these. I always felt like if we could have a bank of ideas, you know, that could be shared, because I think there are so many good ideas out there with a lot of overlaps, and it's really hard to do that. So I do all of these little things, and I spend a lot of time, in fact, and people don't always understand, but like really making sure that I help the students, because I know in 12 weeks, like we had 14 weeks at NYU, 12 weeks here, they're not going to be able to find the right partner. So pre my course, I spend a lot of time talking to people, having all the stakeholders, so that even during the research and then after, they can start talking with the right people and supporting them. So it's a different way also of teaching, because you're not only thinking about like getting them through the process, but you're thinking about like, how can you show them that what might be the next step for the ideas to happen. So I don't have, unfortunately, a one thing, but I'll be happy to continue the conversation and see what you're doing.
Yeah, Katerina.
Yeah, I just shortly ask one question regarding the digital and social side of innovation. So because there is a lot of ongoing discussion nowadays about digital innovation, social innovation for solving big challenges. And I wanted to ask you, Anne-Laure, as an expert in social innovation and also digital innovation. So could you maybe elaborate a little bit on that perspective? So how do you see, you know, those two fields of research coming together and kind of seeing this in practice also about the digital and social side of innovation? Thank you.
Thank you. That's so I don't know what you, I think this is today's, you know, everything is digital. Even our meeting is in some ways digital. So I think it's hard to know. I think that, like as Patrick said, also there's a tendency to think that we need to, the technology is going to be the, but it has been for decades that, you know, technology would save us, and it changed, and now it's, you know, generative AI is going to save the problem. So I think that's one way of thinking. So for me, it's just a tool, technology, digital, etc. So it's like, can it help? Like, what's the like social innovation? The maybe I should have started with that, because sometimes people ask me. For me, it's like, you know, trying to solve issues that are social or environmental, because I think that it's really hard to separate them. For me, environmental justice, you know, brings the two together. But it can be a product, it can be a service, it can also be just policy, new policies. So the outcome of social innovation can be multiple, and it can involve digital. I think that the problem is if you think that just adding a technological tool is going to solve all the issues. And then in particular, remembering also that you know, apps, I remember some students in New York, like 4 or 5 years ago, were thinking of, you know, using some like smartphone thing. And they realized that in some of the high school they were working with, some of the kids didn't even have a smartphone. Okay. And then they had a whole, like, they had a whole poster thing with a QR code. It was pre-COVID, so now everybody knows how to do that. But the kids in the high school were like, oh, I don't have the app for the QR code. And they're like, you don't need an app, you just need your camera. So you see what I mean? It's like sometimes also, because we can think of, you know, clearly, and sometimes you're surprised too, because there is access to digital technology also everywhere. So I think it's like, for me, it's, I wouldn't say it's one or the other. I don't think it's like, it's how do we use technology in a creative way that can support whatever we're trying to do. And also remembering that there are also sometimes unintended consequences. So for example, I was reading a lot about generative AI, and the issue is language. Because, you know, generative AI is mostly in English, so you leave still a lot of people out of a situation. And then that, you know, when you look into some field, is like to do, you need a lot of data, and we don't have necessarily a lot of data. So, you know, if you say, oh, we're going to give a voice to, you know, all these unknown people, But if we don't have data about these, like voiceless people, you can create any types of algorithm. It won't talk about them, or it wouldn't give them a voice. So I think it's, so I'm not against. I think that there are a lot of cool things we can do with technology or digital, things, but we need to be again thoughtful and think about it as a tool. I worked a lot around social technical system or social materials. So
yeah, no, thank you very much for this really interesting conversation. And I wanted to bounce back on Patrick's and Katerina's point, because they are kind of related in some ways. And it's a connectivity. There is a lot of things that is going on in social innovation, but it's at ground level. And the two things that tends to really stop the connectivity is money, so the finance aspect of it, but it's also there doesn't seem to be really strong connectivity. There's lots and millions of ideas and implementation of those ideas, but none of them are connected. And I've been trying very hard to put an application on I'm working on the food systems and working closely with a large European organization called EIT Food. And I've been trying to really push the idea of the ground up, really connecting the different ideas around Europe that are already doing a lot of things. And I'm stuck really with the idea that technology will solve the world. And yes, technology can help for sure, this connectivity aspect of it. But I'm stuck with really the idea that we can only spend the money that from the taxpayer if it is technology driven. And I'm just wondering if if there's some thoughts about, and social innovation has been there for a long time, but has never really broke through in this space really of behavior change, in particular farmers, consumers, industrial organizations. And I'm just wondering if there's something in social innovation that could help about this connectivity of all those ideas that is going on at ground level in the little villages and anywhere in the world, but they are lacking really this linkage to try to really make 1 + 1 = 3.
So very quickly, thanks a lot. I mean, I think it's in a way what Kyria was asking about her class. In some ways, you have all these ideas, and then how do you get there? And I think that's what I've seen also with OpenIDEO, for example, where I spent 4.5 years, and you saw all these ideas coming in, but also during the research phase, people were looking at all these ideas you're talking about on the ground. So for me, I learned so much about all the things that were happening, and I had the same feeling. Is like, why don't we find a way of connecting? And I've been thinking about that, because I think also sometimes you see an idea and then people will be like, oh, it already exists. But I'm like, well, but nobody knows about it. Like even the people on the ground. So I remember doing a workshop in New York with there was a doctor, and like someone was talking about an issue in the community. She's like, oh, but we have, at the city level, there's this service. And we're like, yeah, but nobody knows about it. So what's the issue? So there's not only the connection, but sometimes you have things that exist, but like people don't know about that. I've been thinking about why can't we get all these ideas to be connected? I'm wondering if, and it's the thing we say about innovation, but there's such a push for, being innovative, having the groundbreaking, the new, whatever is the new, original, etc. But in a way, we need to be humble to be able to say, oh, what Elena is doing and what Patrick is doing and what Stefan is doing is like, a little piece of the puzzle. Can we work together. And I think that what I see when you go to, and because also it goes back also to the funding, because how do you get the funding? You have to be innovative, you have to be this. So I think it's like a circle. So we could create this bank of idea, and in a way, Open Idea was that. And nobody, and the founders originally, you know, that's how they thought about it. And they were surprised that nobody would go and pick it up because they felt like, oh, it's like we didn't invent it. So I don't know. I think that it's a long-term change in the way we think about things. Does it make sense? I'm not saying anything because I'm not the organizer here. So I'm like,
yeah, absolutely. I think actually I'll pass the floor to Elena to put the last slides. I think we're running out of time. I don't know if we have time for Patrick. I don't know if it's very brief, if you have any brief comments, or otherwise, Elena, do you want to put the final slides?
Yeah, but please, Patrick, if it's just a couple of words, we
Very
have...
briefly, yeah, what Stefan said there, I did a lot of work, and I'm doing work in the food sector. And one of the things that I see is that the programs have a lot to do to shape the way people address their problems. And so there's a lot of conception of solutions based on the programming that's done. But on the other hand, you know, I think this is a fascinating subject. Maybe in a future meeting, you know, we might try to drill into this in a little bit more detail. And what I'll try to do is contact Stefan through LinkedIn or something, and but we can take it up afterwards. But thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you. So as you said in the chat, so Anne-Laure is available also to be contacted, and we will also share the slides she presented with you. I will just dedicate the last 2 minutes of our meeting today to tell you what's next for the special interest group. So we will, of course, go on with a series of for talks, inviting, as I said, people and practitioners in social innovation, but most notably, the very next gatherings will be firstly for those of you who will be attending the Ispim conference in Tallinn. Please reach us at the table with Kyriaki. We launched a hot topic discussion named Social Innovation and Digital Transformation is AI helping society? So connecting to what just Katerina asked about. And it will be on Monday at 1 p.m., 1:30 p.m., more or less. So for those of you who will be there, please reach us. We will really be glad to meet you physically there. And the very next gathering will be also, we call it a sort of call for action. So me and Kyriaki just co-proposed this special interest group, but of course it's a community-led effort. So we will be very welcoming some insight talks and in general, how we can really engage the community and what will be the key questions, the key topics, the key themes that you will be, you will like to discuss together within this group, or what are maybe the most insightful works you came through in your research. So it will be really a gathering of ideas, and then we will see how we can really make this group work together and grow in the next future. So thanks again, all of you for attending. Thanks again, and coffee. And as I said, I will see you physically in Tallinn, and in general, be following with the very next meetings together.